Hello, everyone. While we are waiting for all the others to arrive, could I ask for a sort of technical check? Could I ask you to confirm if you can hear me? And if you can you enter a yes in that chat box area? Can you hear me, everyone? Can you hear me, or can you hear what I'm saying? And if you can you enter a yes in the chat box? Can you hear me? And please, if you can you enter a yes in that chat box area before we actually start the training? And if you can, please enter a yes in the chat box area, because I can't hear you. You have been muted, so it's not enough if you say yes in your microphone. So could you please type in a yes in the chat box if you can hear me? Is everybody there? Because I feel like I'm talking to myself. If you can hear me, can you enter a yes in the chat box so that I know that everything is okay and you can hear me? Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me? Because otherwise we won't be able to start. I need you to confirm that you can hear me before we start. So if you can, please enter a yes in that chat box area down at the bottom page of this panel, the bottom side of this panel. And can you hear me now? Yes? No? Can you hear me? Is this getting any better? No? I'm just going to talk, and please, the moment you hear me, say something. Can you hear me now, please? And now, can you hear me? And if you can, please let me know immediately so that I can stop talking to myself. Can you not hear me at all? Hello? Testing, testing. Hello? Can anybody hear me now? And can you hear me now? Maybe? No? Can you hear me? Oh, lovely. I have never been this happy to see some yeses appear. Okay, lovely. We have had some technical difficulties over here, so I'm very happy to see some yeses appear. Okay, so I'm assuming that you can hear me now because I have seen two yeses from Val and Eleni. So now we can start. Please, if throughout the training we are experiencing any sort of technical difficulty and my voice goes or something, let me know, because it might be on your side, but it might be on my side. So it's good to know. Right. So let's start. Welcome to this webinar, the third part of a series of methodology webinars that we organized to help you with your day-to-day teaching. And today's session is going to be about listening and how we should approach developing listening skills. What we are going to do today is the following. We're going to have a brief look at the background, the methodological background to teaching listening skills. Then we'll have a look at some challenges that teachers commonly face. And then we are going to hopefully come up with some ideas on how to overcome them. We'll have a brief look at the CFR, and then we'll move on to pronunciation and how we should approach pronunciation activities as such. We'll deal with accents a bit, and then we will also deal with comprehension problems and how our students should approach comprehension problems. We'll try to come up with some solutions as to how to deal with finding additional listening tasks. And finally, we will close with providing feedback and assessing in terms of listening skills. Now, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, feel free to ask them. You can ask them through this chat box area that you have already used. And whenever I see a question appear, I'm just going to stop for a second and I'm going to try and address the issue raised, and then we will move on. Okay, so any questions throughout, just ask. So let's start with a bit of a survey. How much time do you devote to listening on an average class? So let's say in a 45-minute class, how much listening do you devote? You can enter it in a percentage or I don't know how many minutes. So how much time do you devote to listening? 20 minutes. So roughly 50% of the time, 15 minutes. Anybody else? So 20 and 50 minutes is roughly what I do as well. So just to give you a sort of a guideline of what some methodology books refer to as sort of a proportion of reading, speaking, listening, and writing. But if you think about it in reality, what your students spend, the time that your students spend with listening skills is much higher than this area here. So even though, let's say, you only devote 20% of your time with listening, or you only devote 35% of your time with listening, what they will actually spend with listening is 50%. I think it is a pretty interesting statistics, and I can totally understand why it is. The real time devoted to listening is 50% of all performance that they need to do in a foreign language. So it's not just the explicitly, listening focused tasks, but basically everything that you do with them, they need to understand, they need to comprehend what you're saying, all the instructions. So it is generally estimated that an average foreign language learner spends 50% of their total time devoted to listening. So it is, basically what this means is that listening is imperative in the language learning process. Now, why are listening skills so important? Just to start with, I think it is important to think about why listening skills are pretty popular in all of my classes. In fact, listening skills are very popular, and the reason why that is that my students feel that this is the type of task that allows them to do self-assessment, and this is a task where they can clearly see for themselves how well they performed. And my students just usually tell me that they don't like uncertainty, and they want to know for sure where they are and whether they would fail a task or whether they would, for example, pass an exam. And with writing and very often with their speaking skills, they feel like they don't have a clear picture of how well they performed. With listening, they don't have this problem. When they do a listening task, they can clearly see whether or not they understood something. They can see whether or not they could solve the task. Listening skills are absolutely vital to language learning, as they are a precursor to speaking. The entire language development is actually dependent on it. And after all, if you think about it, we very often say a good speaker is a good listener. And I think it is true, since listening provides an opportunity for observation. I know very often when we think about listening, we almost always think about not just developing listening skills, but we usually solve tasks in connection with listening. So we are almost not teaching it, but we are already testing it with tasks. But if you think about listening in itself, is actually an opportunity for observation. They can find good examples of genuine performances, and they can learn from the speaker that they are listening to. They can steal one or two good expressions. So it is a good opportunity for observation and learning as well. And naturally, it is essential for effective spoken communication. You cannot really talk to someone without understanding what they are saying. And finally, it is essential for certain specific aspects of life, such as airport announcements. Now, depending on the methodological book that you read, some of them will say that listening is not, it's not possible to divide listening into sub-skills. Some other books will say that it is. I personally like the whole concept of sub-skills. It just makes skills development a bit more tangible and a bit more easier to manage. So that's why I usually approach skills development with actually dealing with the sub-skills of the given skill. So the sub-skills of listening are the following: discriminating between sounds, coping with and processing fast speech, processing stress and intonation differences, coping with and processing different accents, processing the meaning of different discourse markers, and understanding communicative functions. We also mention very often the types of listening, and I'm just going to rush through these because I know you know all of these already, but just for the sake of including everything that's important in the subjects. Let's have a look at the types of listening. We need to teach them scanning, so how to listen for specific information and specific words. We need to teach them how to skim, so how to listen for just general information or gist. We need to teach them how to listen to solve a task, so instrumental listening. We need to teach them about intensive listening, which is basically, well, listening with a view to trying to understand everything, every word. And of course we have extensive listening, which basically is listening at or below the student's comfortable, fluent listening ability. Very often extensive listening skills are regarded as pointless. Some of my colleagues don't think there is any point in extensive listening to something that is, well, basically too easy for the students. But it does help with certain aspects. It doesn't help with comprehension, obviously, if it's too easy for them. But it helps is, first of all, making the whole comprehension task an automated process, so that they are not stressed and they can learn how to solve a task listening to something. And it also helps with the whole observation aspect of listening. When they are not under stress to understand something, they have the time to deal with the grammar and vocabulary presented in that particular listening. So extensive listening is good for teaching, not necessarily to test comprehension. And finally, we have, of course, listening for pleasure, and I think this is key to developing listening skills. I always tell my students that whatever we are doing in class, depending on how many classes we have a week, accounts for, let's say, 10, 15 or 20% of the language learning process, and the rest they have to provide in their free time. And they can do much more for their own language learning than I ever can, just basically because I can't meet them that often. And I always try to tell them about ways to find music on the internet, ways to find lyrics on the internet, how to watch movies online. I tell them about all the cinemas in my hometown where they can find subtitles, or even movies without subtitles in the original language. So I just try to raise their awareness about what's out there and what they can use to help their listening skills. Another interesting way of looking at listening, and I wanted to include this very much in this training, is that we have active and passive listening. And the reason why I thought this was important to remind ourselves of this is that I find that only one of these two types of listening gets, well, most of the focus in the classroom, and that is passive listening. So whenever we think about listening in class, we very often think about it as the one-way listening, where we basically get our students to listen to a recorded message and they have to solve a task. And even though this is essential for test wiseness, they have to know how to solve these tasks if they want to take a language exam. And not just for a language exam, of course, they need to be able to understand the recorded message. When they are at the airport, they need to be able to understand airport announcements, which gate to go to, etc. And that's why, of course, this part is also important, and that's why I thought we could have a look at this one too. But if you think about it, there is another massively important part of listening, which is called active listening, which is basically two-way listening, which happens when you talk to someone. And not only do you have to air your views, but you also have to listen to the other person, understand the other person. And not only do you have to understand and then think about it and solve the task, but you have to understand and instantly react appropriately, and then listen again, and then understand again, and then react appropriately. It's a very, very dynamic process, and very difficult for students. And we need to deal with two-way listening as well. We need to teach students how to listen effectively. We need to teach them what to do when they don't understand what their partner is saying. Because I sometimes find that, especially in a monolingual class where the student's native language is the same, I find it that when there is a communication breakdown, they don't know how to solve it, and then they just switch back to L1 and they just ask their partner to help them. for example, or they ask a word in their native language, and that's no way, obviously, to deal with communication breakdown in real life. That's why I think it is absolutely imperative that we deal with active listening as well in class. And finally, as a sort of a methodological background, communicative competence is essential as well. And if you think about communicative competence and the four tiers of communicative competence, it is clear that all four are needed for an essential listener as well. We need to teach them all the grammar required for effective listening, with a special focus on pronunciation, naturally, which is essential for listening skills. We need to teach them social linguistic competence, all the functions and social rules of language. It just helps comprehension. We need to teach them about discourse markers, even in speech. And finally, we need to teach them all the strategies that they need to use when there is actually miscommunication, a misunderstanding, and a miscomprehension, so that they have something that they can rely on. There is something that they can use. So before we go into details, the quick tips are the following. We need to teach them the sub-skills. I really do think it helps a lot if you break down a skill into sub-skills. Those are always more tangible, because I know very often we say skills cannot be taught, but sub-skills can be taught. So listening cannot be taught, but you can teach about pronunciation and individual sounds, for example. Please also teach them the strategies, both exam strategies and compensation strategies. Focus on both active and passive listening. Devote time to connected speech. We will talk about that during this training. Expose them to regional accents that, well, naturally above a certain level. I think above a relatively strong B2 level, you can expose them to regional accents. Make use of listening as an observational tool, so use extensive listening to actually teach something to your student, not to test their comprehension, but to teach them something. And do not neglect the importance of listening for pleasure. Help your students find pleasure in listening. Help your students find opportunities outside the classroom that they can use to develop their listening skills. So let's see some of the challenges. Now, I actually tried tried to find some challenges that teachers regularly face. So I did ask my own colleagues, and I also asked my students what they would want, and I thought about whether or not that would be problematic for myself. So one of the main problems that teachers face is the following. My students would like to understand different accents, but there aren't enough practice opportunities in the book. They want to understand every word and panic when they don't. My students don't know how to deal with comprehension problems when they speak. My students mishear quite a lot of things, which leads to misunderstanding. And finally, I don't know how to provide more practice opportunities once we've done all the tasks in the book. If these problems are not completely identical with yours, feel free to ask your own, and we can all get together and try to solve those too. But these are the 5 main problem areas that I will address during this training. Now, I usually, whenever I deal with any aspect of language teaching, I turn to CFR. I think CFR helps a lot with day-to-day teaching. I know sometimes it looks a bit vague, but there are very specific parts in it too. And I just wanted to remind you what CFR says about listening skills. And obviously, it is very easy to see how listening should be developed from A1 to C2 level. So A1 students are expected to recognize only familiar words and very basic phrases, and only when people speak slowly and very clearly. A2 students can understand not just words but phrases and highest frequency vocabulary, but only if it's related to their immediate personal relevance, and they can basically understand the main point in a short and clear, simple message. And then there is a big jump for B1 if you think about it, because B1 students are much more capable in terms of understanding than A1 and A2 students. They can understand the main points of clear standard speech, on familiar matters regularly encountered in work, school, etc. So again, they can understand this as long as it directly is linked to them. B2 students can understand extended speech and lectures, and they can also follow complex lines of arguments. They can understand most TV news and current affair programs. Now, if you want to help them with this endeavor, if you want to help them meet the CFR requirement that they can understand TV and current affairs programs and films, that is probably the time when you should try and start exposing them to some regional accents, even though I would not test them on it, so I would probably, of course, still use listening comprehension tasks in a standard dialect. But just for the fun of it, I would just throw in every now and then some, I don't know, an Irish accent or some other, just so that they can have fun and just so that I raise their awareness of the fact that not everybody speaks in a standard dialect. And in C1 level, they can understand extended speech, even when it's not clearly structured, and they can understand television programs and films without too much effort. So basically it's C1 level where I put the greatest emphasis on regional accents, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish. Those are probably a Northern English accent as well. These are very problematic for students, and I think C1 is the level where you can go into more details about that. And I just wanted to show you this this slide as well, especially because this presentation is going to be available in a few weeks online, along with the recording of this webinar. And I just wanted to show you how much understanding and interaction is dependent on one another. So, for example, A2 students can understand phrases and very basic vocabulary, and they can communicate in simple routine tasks using very simple phrases. So basically, whatever they can understand, they can use. So this just reinforces the whole idea that that listening is a precursor to speaking. Listening provides an opportunity for observation. So when they are listening, they are actually learning whatever they hear as well. Right. So let's move on to the first sub-skill of listening skills, which is pronunciation. Because if you remember, the first three main areas of sub-skills were actually related to pronunciation and phonology, phonetics, which was discriminating between sounds, so individual sounds, coping with and processing fast speech, processing stress, and intonation differences. And by dealing with this issue, we are already dealing with one of the problem areas that we talked about, which is my students mishear quite a lot of things, which leads to misunderstanding. Now, before we have a look at certain activities that you can do with pronunciation, I just want to sort of think about the fact or address the question of whether or not we should actually explicitly teach pronunciation. Some people say, why should we actually teach pronunciation when pronunciation sort of develops by itself? Some of my colleagues do not teach pronunciation overtly. They just sort of, they don't really teach IPA, they don't teach individual sounds, and they told me, why should we actually deal with pronunciation overtly when, after all, if there are people who don't teach pronunciation at all and those students can pronounce the words anyway and they can deal with the language anyway, why should we devote time to actual active pronunciation teaching and going into details about the phonetic transcriptions and individual sounds? Now, I personally think teaching pronunciation helps because there are two approaches to listening skills, and one of them is the meaning building approach and the other one is the decoding approach, or in other words, one of them is the top-down approach and the other one is the bottom-up approach. Now, the top-down approach is very common, especially in communicative language teaching, is that we don't break down a sentence into, you know, tiny little elements, but we try to see the big picture. And the top-down approach states that when students listen to a text, be it recorded or live, they do the following steps, so take the following steps. They draw upon their knowledge of the word, knowledge of the topic, knowledge of the culture, then they understand the literal meaning of what they hear, and then they select relevant information of what was mentioned. Then they recognize redundant information and they reject redundant information. And then they connect the ideas based on what they have understood, and then they make inferences. Now, while this is actually true, obviously, to what they usually do, if you think about it, the bottom-up approach makes a lot of sense as well. And I think this is where phonetics and phonology comes in. The bottom-up approach suggests that when students listen to a text, they first identify the sounds that they hear, and then they try to work out where words begin and end. And this is something that I can completely confirm because I spent, sort of as a hobby, I spent 6 years of my life trying to learn Italian. And step 2 was definitely a conscious effort from my side. It took me months to figure out how to actually understand where one word ends and the other one starts, instead of just a continuous, almost a mass of sounds. So step 2 is pretty difficult for students. Step 3, they try to deal with all the unknown words of what they have just listened to, and then they try to recognize where clauses and phrases end. They try to also make use of sentence stress when they are trying to understand what has been said. And then they try to recognize chunks of language. Now, if we accept that this could actually be true of what's happening in listening comprehension, then phonetics and phonology helps greatly with almost every step. So it helps with them understanding the sound. It also helps with working out where words end and begin. So let's see some overt pronunciation teaching tasks to help them better understand and better differentiate between individual sounds. One task that I do at higher levels is work with minimal pairs like think and think. I do it in a bingo or a gap fill form, and I also do sort of flashcards that they have to repeat. And then I also do this gap fill task that you can see here at much higher levels, so that's very strong B2s or with C1 students, where they have to fill 2 gaps in the same sentence, which are always homophones. These are not minimal pairs, sorry, I have a minimal pair version as well, but these are homophones. So these are all pronounced the same way, but they are spelled differently, so such as I don't know where to wear this jacket, for example. At lower levels, of course, I provide the words in a box above, and they only have to locate the 2 homophone pairs and then put it back in the correct sentence. I find that it helps with very commonly mispronounced words as well. So, for example, one of the most commonly mispronounced words in my own class is this word. Almost everybody pronounces this as one, and it does help greatly if we can find a homophone pair, and I just drill it very strongly, and I make them practice it a lot in the same sentence. For example, I won $1 million, and just by providing them with something that they can remember is pronounced the same way, we have managed to get rid of the incorrect pronunciation, and now they pronounce one the way they should. So working with minimal pairs, working with homophones is very effective in my own classroom, and I think it is also pretty good fun for students. Again, just on the same subject of working with individual sounds, I do stress spotting tasks on a word level or a sentence level. Again, just a very good example is this word, very commonly mispronounced in my own classes. I always try to tell them that this area I should never hear whenever they say it. This should never be heard, and it does help when you raise their awareness about where the stress is, because very often they mispronounce this word because they think the stress is actually here. Or even on with the same word, syllable counting helps a lot as well, because sometimes the reason why they mispronounce a word is because they don't really have any awareness of syllable counting. They don't know how many syllables a word is. It's because they don't really understand the connection between sounds and letters. So it does help if you ask them how many syllables is this word. Now, when you have the individual sounds part down, and they have a basic grasp of the sounds in English and how they correspond to letters. You can move on to connected speech, and I think it is, even though it's a very sort of grammary thing, and some students don't like dealing with grammar in such an overt way, in such a conscious way, but I think we need to raise their awareness about connected speech, because they will not pick up on most of these phenomena by themselves. We need to tell them about these. And one of them is the phenomena of reducing sounds and weak forms. And just as an example, I know that when you start learning a language, you can't really, understand and comprehend everything that that language entails. So that's why when we teach this, we sometimes try to make it easier for them by pronouncing it in a slightly artificial way, like "How are you?" Just so that they understand that this is 3 words, and when we practice, the difference between M, is, and R. But we need to make sure that they learn every structure with the correct pronunciation. Otherwise, they will not even be able to understand such a simple question, because what they will hear will be "How are you?" So we need to make sure that even at lower levels, what we teach is the actual pronunciation of sentences and structures. So we need to tell them about weak forms, and that they may end up not hearing certain parts of a sentence. The other area is consonant vowel linking and vowel linking, such as a box of eggs, which is not a box of eggs, but it's a box of eggs, or an apple, that sometimes what they hear, and I have had this question, they asked me what a napple was in class. They heard me say it and they said, "Oh, what is a napple?" And then I obviously had to explain them that what I said was an apple, obviously. And the same goes with vowel linking. What they will hear is not 3 eggs, but 3 eggs, almost in one word. So this is about connecting words, and they will like it if you present it in a sort of a funny, activity-based way, and not just telling about it. I think it is fascinating for most students, and so are all these, the next ones. The next phenomena is the linking R phenomenon, where even in the non-rhotic accents, the R is very distinctively pronounced, even in words where it is not normally pronounced, if the next word starts with a vowel. So even though we don't usually say car, but if there is a vowel coming after it, they will pronounce it, and they will say the car is here, for example. My favorite area to teach is the intrusive R. My students absolutely love it, and I think this is key to listening comprehension. I have very often had students coming back to class from a language exam, and they said that they had to listen to, not very often, but this happened once, sorry, that they came back from a language exam, and they told me, guess what happened? We had to listen to a speech about, American press and media, mass media, and there was a question about rats. And I was just thinking, okay. And then I accidentally, a few weeks later, found a very similar listening in one of the course books. And what actually may have happened in that exam was something like a media rat home. So it was basically a British RP accent, and in British accent, obviously, we have this very common phonological phenomena called intrusive R, where when one word ends with a vowel and another word, the next word, starts with a vowel, but only in British accent, we have this phenomena of intrusive R. So obviously the question and the script was not about rats. It was basically media at home with an intrusive R. So this clearly shows that if you don't tell them about the fact that when they listen to British people, they may hear vanilla ice cream instead of vanilla ice cream, or they may hear law office instead of law office, or they may hear law and order instead of law and order. They may not actually understand words, they misunderstand words, but if we tell them about this and we play games about this, they will be able to understand it. You can find a myriad of videos on YouTube and in lots of other places where native speakers are pronouncing these words, and you can use these videos to drill this phenomena. Let's see some of the other ones, which is double sounds. When one of the sound disappears, so sometimes they will hear I finished, but there was actually an I've. They just didn't hear it. Again, this might be important for grammar, so that they don't think that a grammar rule, for example, that they have learned is not actually applied in real life. It is important that we remind them that even though they will not always hear the V, it will be there, for example. Or I'm a bit tired. We don't pronounce both of the T's, we just say bit tired as if it was one word. Or that they will not always hear the T in I can't swim. So we need to teach them about how to deal with stuff like this as well. Now, how shall we deal with connected speech, and how shall we practice it? When we deal with weak and strong pronunciation, we can do the how many words task. We just play a few sentences such as, I don't know, how are you, and all these problematic weak form pronunciations, and they have to write down the exact sentences, and they have to count how many words they heard. We can also do the same with how many syllables. We just pronounce or listen to a recording with native pronunciation and in fast speech or connected speech, and they have to write down how many syllables they hear. We can also start using arrows if you're not using them already. You may already use them already. Use arrows on the board to highlight the connection between sounds and words, how they are connected and pronounced together. Even if we don't teach the IPA, we can use starting the schwa sound at least to highlight the unstressed words, unstressed syllables, and how unstressed sounds are pronounced. Try and introduce new structures with their pronunciation, so along with their pronunciation. And I know this is something that everybody is doing regularly with words, with every new vocabulary. But somehow, sometimes I find we don't really address the same pronunciation issue when we teach new structures, because we think it is sort of obvious. If they already know have, and if they already know you, and they already know ever, obviously they will be able to pronounce this correctly. But what they will hear is not have you ever, but they will hear have you ever. So we need to teach them what they will actually hear. And finally, another activity that I think could be of use, of course not if overdone, because it could be a bit boring, but every now and then it is very helpful to do dictation, either a full-on dictation when we actually dictate a few sentences that they have to write down word for word, and also when we hand out the script of a task with some chunks missing, and they have to listen to the recording and come up with an idea or a suggestion as to what is missing. This especially helps with a very difficult accent or with fast speech. And again, just on the subject of pronunciation and sounds, I just want to talk a little bit about misheard lyrics or anything misheard, which are called mondegreens. I don't know if you know this expression, or I don't know if you know where this comes from. Mondegreens are things that we misunderstood. So it's not that we didn't understand it, we understood something, but it wasn't what was said. And it comes from a famously misunderstood poem where somebody thought that the final line of this poem was, "and Lady Mondegreen." Now, you might know this poem, first of all, but even if you don't, can you guess what the original sentence was? The one that you can see in green. This is the part that was misunderstood. What do you think the actual sentence was? "And Lady Mondegreen." Any ideas? Or anyone who knows this poem and the whole story behind it? No? What was this? Yeah, it's going to be that one. I think it's very funny. It was, and laid him on the green. And obviously, in connected speech, this one is pronounced exactly this way. When you pronounce it for yourself at home, you can try it right now, you will realize that actually how you pronounce this sentence is that, and laid him on the green. And it is pretty funny because this was, I think, included in a sort of an essay or a thesis where this person argued for Lady Mondegreen and how Lady Mondegreen was mourning the Earl of Murray, whereas no such thing happened. Lady Mondegreen never even existed. And I think it is a very good example of connected speech and how you can misunderstand something, and that is why I think it is a good idea to actively and overtly deal with connected speech and the different phenomena involved in that. But Mondegreens and misheard lyrics are not just a thing of the past or just one example. We do it every day, and if you Google misheard lyrics, you will find a myriad of websites that deal with commonly misheard lyrics. This is one of them that famously Bob Dylan misunderstood. Which song is this? What do you think? This is the misheard version. Who's the band? So this is not supposed to be Get High. It's supposed to be I Can't Hide. And who was the band? It's such a feeling that my love I can't hide. Do you know? I know it was a long time ago when they were big. It's the Beatles. Yeah, it's the Beatles. And very famously, Bob Dylan misheard this song, these lyrics, and then when he met them, he commented on this song and how much he loves this Beatles song. And then they told him that yeah, it's lovely, but the lyrics are not I get high, but I can't hide. So even native speakers do quite a lot of mishearing. What about the next one? What do you think is the likelihood of having a love song where the chorus goes, how do I get alone? It's probably not this one. So what can the original be? Of course, it's how do I get you alone? That's actually a Celine Dion song. And what about this one? I think this is the most famous misheard lyrics. Excuse me while I kiss this guy. And the original was excuse me while I kiss the sky. And who was the artist? It was Jimi Hendrix. And finally, the last one, Watch Your Back, and the original was Want You Back. And this is also pretty funny, I think. This is a Take That song that I love very much. And of course, it's back for good, and it's a love song. So I find it very funny that in a love song, some people and many of my students, what they hear is Watch Your Back, which is not a very lovely thing to say to our our partners. So I think dealing with pronunciation in an overt way is very useful. You can also deal with connected speech using misheard lyrics like these. You can find loads of examples, I mean hundreds of examples on the internet with the most commonly misheard lyrics, and you can listen to the song and you can ask them to write down what they hear. So there are really a lot of fun activities with pronunciation, and the whole example of Mondegreens just shows that that we have to deal with pronunciation in an overt way, and we have to deal with connected speech as well. Now, how shall we deal with the problem of misunderstandings? How should we teach them to get help? How should they react when misunderstanding happens or when they don't understand something, for example? In a two-way listening, of course, we need to teach them all the necessary words that they need to know to ask for clarification. And we need to drill these sentences very thoroughly, so that when communication breakdown happens, they actually don't have to think about ways to help, to ask for help, but they know already. They know it by heart how to ask for help. And in one-way listening, basically, we can listen for a second and a third time. Obviously not in an examination context where you can only listen for as many times as you are allowed to. But in class, you can listen for the second time, you can listen for the third time. If you're at home, you can listen for as many times as you want. You can also check your understanding using the script. And you can also use general knowledge and the information given in the task to choose the most viable option. So just as an example, let's say the task, the question goes, entry ticket to the museum for children. And they hear a number, they're not entirely sure how to differentiate 80 from 18. They could differentiate it very easily if they knew about word stress and they knew that this is 18 and this is 80. But let's say they don't know this. And they just heard something and they're unsure as to whether this is 80 or 18. Now, which one, the likelihood of which one is higher? That the museum ticket for children for one child is 80 pounds or that it is 18 pounds. So this is just sort of a general knowledge and just common sense that sometimes students fail to use in an examination context. And another area that I sometimes find students have problems with is how to deal with unknown vocabulary in the listening. They panic when they hear something that they don't understand. And first of all, we will help them by talking about the intrusive R, for example, because it may be that what they heard was not the exact word that they heard, but there was just an extra R. Good example is vanilla rice cream. It's not a rice cream, it's an ice cream, but the pronunciation is vanilla rice cream. And also encouraging them to read a lot and read different style, articles from different magazines and different websites will help with that, because after all, if you think about it, the more words you know, and even the more languages you know, and the more, widely read and educated you are, the better you will deal with unknown vocabulary. So just as an example, every now and then I have some medical students or doctors that I teach, and they are very good at dealing with unknown vocabulary, because in medical school you have to learn Latin, and Latin helps a lot. A very good knowledge of Latin helps a lot with languages. So any sort of background knowledge can help with making meaning out of unknown vocabulary. So we really need to encourage them to read a lot of text and be knowledgeable about the word, and we need to tell them that this will actually help with their comprehension. Because there is no way we can teach them every word in the English language. They need to be aware of this, that this is never going to happen, so they need to come up with ways to guess the meaning of words from context. And again, related to the same issue of how to deal with miscomprehension and how to get help, we need to turn to strategic competence, and we need to teach them, paraphrasing and circumlocution, etc. But that part has already been covered in the How to Teach speaking webinar, how to self-help, how to help themselves with certain fillers, with, speaking more slowly, with restructuring, with borrowing from L1, with generalization, etc. So let's now just focus on getting help, because in terms of listening, this is what's the most important. We need to teach them specific expressions on how to ask for clarification, how to ask for repetition, and how to prompt for clarification. And I usually give them either just a one-page document that they can put in their notebooks, or I just print this out, this poster out as a sort of a small poster, and I display it in the classroom so that they can actually memorize all these expressions. Because I know these seem easy expressions, could you explain what you mean by blah, 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 blah. But when it comes to communication breakdown, it is very stressful, so they need to know these, and it needs to be an automatic process. Right. Have you got any questions so far? Because if you do, really feel free to stop me and ask any questions. So this is what I wanted to say about pronunciation, and now let's move on to accents, which is a very, just a personal interest of mine. Now, by teaching them how to cope with different accents, we are actually addressing one of the sub-skills of listening, and of course we are also addressing one of the main problem issues that we stated at the beginning of this training. Now, I just listed some of the most problematic accents. I could easily add a lot more: Australian, South African accent, but these are sort of commonly, I don't know, regarded as difficult accents. Now, how shall we deal with accents? So like I said before, don't introduce non-standard dialects of English too early. It's just too stressful for students and they will not understand anything whatsoever. But at a strong B2 or C1 level, you basically have to, and the reason why is because this is what they will or can encounter in the world. I have had sort of complaints, not really complaints, but what some of my friends told me how disappointing it was for them that after having spent 10 years learning English, they went to live in London or they went on holiday to London only to find that there is hardly anyone they can understand, because they couldn't understand London accent, they couldn't understand East London accent, they couldn't understand, well, basically any accent except for the standards, you know, the received pronunciation that they heard every now and then. But of course, the majority of people were not speaking with an RP accent. So I think it is imperative that we sort of try to train them a bit with how to deal with accents, not because we want them to speak with a native accent, not because we want them to pick it up. Of course, this is not it's never the goal of English language teaching, trying to teach them how to speak with an Irish accent, unless they are actors and actresses, in which case, of course, they will have to learn how to speak with a certain accent. But it is imperative that we teach them how to get accustomed to a new accent, how to try and understand. And it doesn't take a lot of practice to be able to understand Irish accent. All it takes is listening to a recording and working with a certain accent for just a few, I don't know, a few minutes every lesson for a few weeks. So just as an example of one of the common or the latest ones that I have created, I am currently creating my own sort of tasks with different accents, and the reason for that is because I haven't yet found a course book or any book that deals with regional accents in an explicit way. So what I do basically is I find videos and audios on the internet. I usually use YouTube. And I use these audios and I create some questions and tasks for them, and we listen to these audios as many times as we can. And if you remember, we talked about extensive listening. And when we talked about extensive listening, I said that there is a reason why we should sort of sometimes listen to texts that are basically too easy for the students. And I think dealing with accents is a great example for this. I always try to choose very short tasks, so a maximum of, let's say, 1 minute. And I try to choose very easy texts. I mean, in terms of vocabulary and grammar, they are supposed to be very easy because the tough part here is going to be the accent. So we cannot force our students to try and understand a very complicated and long task where someone is speaking with an Irish accent. It's going to be hard enough in itself trying to understand basic words like house, which is going to be pronounced obviously completely differently, or even the word itself, Irish itself, is going to pronounce completely differently with an Irish accent. So we need to choose short and easy tasks from YouTube. You will find millions for every accent. Another good example is to try and find famous people who are from that given country and who speak with that given accent. A good example would be for Irish accent, Colin Farrell. And what I did was I found a recent interview he had. It was on YouTube on one of the morning shows. And then I just used only a 1 minute section of it. It was about the film Saving Mr. Banks. And what I did first, we just listened to the text. And I asked some questions just so to test sort of what they can understand without well, us working on Irish accent to start with. Very often they will understand some things. My students understood a lot. For example, they understood this one, the answer to this one. They understood that one. So numbers they could understand. But then why did she give in the end? For example, nobody knew the answer to that one because that part was too difficult. So first we just listen to this short clip as many times as they want to. They try to answer the questions. And then I give them the actual script, which, yes, unfortunately, I had to type up because I couldn't yet found a pronunciation textbook that deals with accent. If there is one, I'll be very happy, but for the time being, I will have to type these up. It doesn't take a long time to type up the script of a 1 minute video or audio. You just have to listen to it, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and if you're a fast typer, you will be able to do this. So I typed up the actual script. I deleted some of the words, and I asked them to try and find out what that exact word was. And it was pretty interesting. It also helps with connected speech, and it also helps with exam strategies. So, for example, here, I think you guys and I don't even have to listen to this audio to know that this is probably writer, because Mary Poppins books obviously need an author or a writer, but what they thought was right, as in the right to do something. So it helps with connected speech, and it also helps with accents a great deal. I try to not create a lot of gaps, because this will be extremely hard for them. And I also try not to delete any words which are specifically difficult in that given accent. So, for example, Colin Farrell pronounces house as I can't even remember how, but in a very, very difficult way. So I thought I would not really delete this word, because this is the most difficult part of the entire, Irish accent or of this speech. So I left this in, and we just listened to it again, and we just talked about how different the pronunciation of house is in Irish accent. And believe it or not, this helps a great deal, really. We just listen to, let's say, 3 or 4 different audios with Irish accents, and now they are much more confident with understanding Irish accents. So that is a very good way to deal with different accents. The way I do it, I just have a sort of a bank of information with famous people of different nationalities, and just as an example, so that you can use these in your own classroom and you don't have to look it up. Colin Farrell and Darrell O'Brien are very good examples of Irish accent. Darrell O'Brien is an amazingly funny stand-up comedian, so if you use that in class, your students will love you forever. For Scottish accent, you can use James McAvoy, Ewan McGregor, and Sean Connery, of course. For Welsh accent, you can use Anthony Hopkins and Tom Jones. For Northern English accent, you can use the film Full Monty. And for an East London accent, you can use a very old David Beckham video. Don't use recent ones, because he spent a very long time in the United States recently. And I have also read an article, and I've checked, and it is true that he has been trying to polish his accent and get rid of the East London accent. So in most recent videos, you may not be able to detect an East London accent, David Beckham, but he is from East London, and all the early videos and early interviews that you can find with him will feature an East London accent. And you can find loads of others, by the way, but this is just a sort of an example of how you can start. You can also, of course, look up actual accent training videos. There are loads of those. I just thought it might be interesting for your students to actually listen to famous people. They feel like they can sort of connect to the real world this way. And also, I don't know, if you have a class full of people who love football, they will love you if you bring a David Beckham video in class anyway. Right, so this is what I wanted to say about accents, and now I'd like to move on to the next problem that we stated in the beginning of this training, which was I don't know how to provide more practice opportunities once we have done all the tasks in the book. So let's think about additional listening tasks that you can do either in class, of course, or you can just raise your students' awareness of their existence. So let's start from here. Of course, you can, a student can have a personal contact with native speakers and they can talk to them, which would be lovely and ideal. It doesn't happen very often. It doesn't even happen very often if your students and you are living in a country where English is the official language. It's not always easy for students who learn a foreign language to make contact and to reach out to native speakers. So even though this would be lovely, that if they could do it in their free time, but the likelihood of this happening is not the highest. Of course, they can have access to audiobooks and magazines, which are a great idea. You can also find a lot of English language magazines which come with an audio supplement as well, so where they can read the article and listen to the article as well, which could help greatly. And also we have music and lyrics, which is a lovely area. I remember this helped greatly at the early stages of my language learning. Not to mention subtitled films, which are still and even today are helping me greatly with keeping up my English and practicing it every day. But without doubt, the best source of information is the internet. You really need to make sure that you recommend certain websites on the internet, and you should also make sure that you test those websites, you test the validity of the information there, because after all, internet is a lovely thing, but anybody can create and post anything on the internet. So it's basically your job as a teacher, I find, to pre-test certain websites and only recommend websites that you're well, confident with. Why is it important that we try and locate additional listening tasks for our students? I think it is because of the concept of engagement, and this is something that I need to remind myself of every day, that it is, I think, the job of an English teacher to engage their students with the language. We really need to try and encourage them to use the language spontaneously, to make English their own, to use it outside the classroom in an informal context and in genuine and meaningful situations. This is naturally harder if you are currently living and teaching in a country where English is not the official language. I am living in a country where English is not the official language. So it is pretty difficult for me to engage my students with the language and to identify areas here in this country where they can use language on a day-to-day basis, but I do try, and I have come up with a lot of good examples. So try and identify out of classroom activities for them. Try and find an English language stand-up comedy in your own city, maybe an English language theater in your own city, and an English language cinema. Naturally, if you're living in a native country right now, this is going to sound completely stupid to you. But those of you who are not living in a native English country right now will understand what I mean. So just try to tell them about all these places, so that if they want to, they can go to these places. Also try and monitor their engagement with the language. You can do it through a dashboard of achievements. I've done this dashboard where every Monday they could report what they did over the weekend, and we could post little post-its on this dashboard with words such as, I watched the film with subtitles and understood most of it, or I helped a group of tourists in Hero Square, for example. And it just further reminds them that this is a language that you can actually use outside the classroom. It's not a language that you learn as a subject and then you go home. It's something that you learn and you can use every day and every minute of life. Of course, you can also create out-of-classroom activities for them if you want. If you have I don't know, if you're not a native speaker yourself, you can bring a native speaker into class if you have a friend, and they can have a chat together. You can also take them to the cinema together. You can also organize, of course, quiz nights for them in class, sort of pub quizzes. So there are lots of things that you can actually create, but if you don't really have the time and energy for that, you can just identify out of classroom activities for them. And finally, I just want to recommend you some additional activities and some websites that I'm sure you will find very useful. One of them is lyricsmode.com. It's a website where you can listen to a song and at the same time read the lyrics on the same website, and you can also leave comments on the lyrics, so you can, based on what, I don't know, what you think it means and your feelings about that particular song, and you can meet with other people who love this song, and you can talk about it. So it's sort of a hub for music lovers, and you know, just singing along to a song helps you greatly with language learning. You will actually, if you love a song, you will learn the lyrics by heart. You'll never forget the lyrics ever again. I remember I know lots of phrases and even full sentences from certain songs, and I use them every day, and I never even learned them consciously. I just basically learned the song because I loved it so much. So never underestimate the importance and the power of music and how it can help your students. Another interesting area is not a listening task as such, but it's a rhyme finding dictionary. It's called rhymezone.com, and it helps with the pronunciation greatly. So sometimes I set poem writing tasks, and I send them this link so that when they write the poems, they know how to, I don't know, look for a rhyme for mine, for example. And this is just a very simple but useful website that looks up all the words that rhyme with mine, for example. It gives you 500 results, almost 500 results for mine, 1 syllable, 2 syllable, I don't know, depending on how many syllables actually rhyme. And if you click on them, it gives you the meaning so that students can check if that sentence actually fits in their poem. And finally, of course, I tell my students regularly to watch subtitled films, and when they watch it on DVD, to set the subtitle to English and not their native language. This is sometimes hard, but I really need to make sure they understand that there is not really any point in watching a film with their native subtitles. But apart from DVDs, you can also recommend them this website, which is a video website, a legal video website, obviously, so they don't have to download or do anything illegal. This is a legal website which features lots of videos, I mean hundreds of videos of either copyright-free films. There are some free films, full films, but those are usually free and copyright-free, and some videos, short videos, 3 or 4 minutes of videos, and they are all subtitled, and when they click on the words in the subtitles, it gives them a definition. So it's almost like a dream come true. This is what every student would have wanted whenever they watched a DVD. It's an excellent website. I think you're going to love it. And finally, I think this is a website that I am pretty sure most of you know. This is IESOLlab.com, which is an amazing website which provides a myriad of listening opportunities, different levels, academic and general, difficult. It's just amazing. It provides pre and post listening exercises, speaking tasks based on this, and they can listen to the audio and of course fill in the multiple choice, and the website also corrects it for them. So I think this is the best additional activity site that you can ever recommend to any student. This would probably take them 4 years to complete all the tasks, so no student can say that you haven't really provided them with any support. If they find this website, they're going to be good for a few years to come. And now let's move on to providing feedback and assessing and how to assess listening skills as such. Let's start with one-way listening, which is, if you remember, the recorded message that they need to listen to and solve a task. First of all, make it formal and make it very regular, the assessment. And what I mean by this is, yes, every now and then we will do the listening tasks and they will correct it, mark it for themselves, but do formal assessment of listening skills regularly and provide them with an actual feedback. Let's say your listening skills are, I don't know, at B1 level, A2 level, etc., or I don't know. Just try to make it a very objective sounding assessment, because I find that students are struggling greatly with not finding enough objective assessment in the classroom. They want to know if they're good enough. They want to know if what they did was, I don't know, if 60% is good enough, if they would pass, etc. So make it formal and regular. Also try to limit the other 3 skills, reading, writing, and speaking. This is extremely important so that you don't have any bias that may alter the results. So really, please do make sure that you don't make them write a lot or you don't make them read a lot in a listening task. After all, in a listening task, we should actually test listening skills and not reading skills. And if you make them read a lot or if you make them write a lot, we may end up with incorrect results on their listening skills, but not because their listening is not good enough, but because their writing skill is not good enough. So try to limit testing to testing listening and not testing every other skill. Spelling and grammar errors should not be penalized as long as the answer that they gave you is actually recognizable as the correct answer. Try not to have any translation from the target language to their native language, as once again this should alter the results, and second of all, I think it provides them with well, how shall I put it? It provides them with an unfair advantage. It will help them. Of course, if you provide them, let's say, with questions in their native language and then they have to listen to something in English, you have already sort of translated the text for them, because if the questions are in their native language, they will be able to understand a lot about the topic. So I know that there are examinations, examination systems where you use 2 languages, both languages, but I think it is a much more reliable test when everything is in the target language. Also make sure your task fits your students' needs and it is specific enough to the task of the exam attempted, if, of course, if you are preparing for a language exam. And in terms of two-way listening, again, make it formal and regular. You remember two-way is the dynamic listening when they are talking to someone and they also have to understand what the other person is saying. And how can you do that? Well, no, they won't be. It's a very good question, Eleni. And in our exam, I can't talk for every other exam, but in our exam, in City and Guilds exams, spelling and grammar mistakes are not penalized. And the reason why they are not penalized is because from a methodological point of view, they should not be penalized. So it's not because, I don't know, we are nice and we are lenient, but we don't have to penalize spelling and grammar. There are areas where we can, which are the writing tasks. But when you are testing receptive skills, reading and listening, you are not looking for grammar errors. You are not looking for taking away points for not using, I don't know, the present simple third person singular S. What we are looking for is whether or not that person understood that, I don't know, the passengers are supposed to go to gate 24. It doesn't matter whether or not they spell, I don't know, gate with not just an E but also with a Y, for example. If we can understand that they know what the question and the answer was, we don't have to take away any points for spelling and grammar. So no, even in the real life City and Guilds exams, spelling and grammar errors are not penalized in the listening and reading sections, as long as, and this is important, as long as the answer is clearly recognizable as the correct answer. In any level, yes. This is true for C2 level as well, so from A1 to C2. And the way we work is basically, if they make a spelling error, but we still we still know what the word is that they mean, we will accept it. But if they make a spelling error that results in another word, then we will not accept it. So for example, if instead of hit, they write heat, we will not accept it, because heat is a different word from the English language. Yeah, exactly. We will not accept these two combinations, because the two are not just, this is not a misspelling. If you write hit with an EA, it's not a misspelling. You wrote a completely different word, which may mean that you didn't understand the question. But if you write heat with H-E-A-T-E, for example, then we know that what you meant was heat, but you're just not sure how to spell it. And I think this is what we should, this is how we should approach listening skills in our day-to-day teaching as well. And now, coming back to the two-way listening, try to differentiate between impeding and non-impeding errors when assessing speaking. And this is how you can make sure that you take two-way listening into account when dealing with speaking. So if you think about it, if you're speaking to someone and they make minor errors, it doesn't really cause a communication breakdown. So if somebody says, and yes, and my mother regularly cook, or my mother regularly go shopping, I can still understand what's happening. It doesn't really cause a breakdown. It doesn't really break the flow of conversation. But if they say, I have a college in my workplace, and this college is very mean to me every day, then this is clearly a big problem, because even though I and you guys as teachers would be able to understand that what this student meant was, I have a colleague at work and that colleague is being mean to me, it might not be the case that that everybody would understand this. So if this person was talking to a non-native speaker or a non-teacher, they may not be able to make this connection between college and colleagues, and that they are false friends, and that they are very often confused. And a regular listener would just hear, what? A college at work? What does that mean? So we really need to differentiate between impeding and non-impeding errors, and actually this is what we do here in City and Guilds. So most of these tips on listening come from our official markers guide. We tell our markers to differentiate between impeding and non-impeding errors. Impeding errors, of course, should be penalized slightly harsher than non-impeding errors. After all, our goal is an effective communication, and impeding errors are a much bigger problem if we want to have effective communication. Also, when whatever mark scheme you apply, please use one for speaking, of course. Use one which takes listening comprehension into account. So, for example, if you have a C1 student doing a mock exam for a C1 City and Guilds exam, for example, and they misunderstand or not understand at all every second question. The problem is that those questions were at C1 level. So if they can't understand, for example, what leisure facilities do you have in your city, and they don't understand leisure facility, that is a problem, especially when the same thing happens, let's say, 10 times during the exam, because what this means basically is that they cannot understand questions which are at their targeted level, which means they are not at the targeted level. So whenever there are comprehension problems in speech, it might mean that they are not at the required level yet. Also bear the requirements of the applicable CFR level in mind naturally. And when you deal with pronunciation, try not to be too harsh. We are not too harsh either here at City and Guild. A clear enough pronunciation is what we need. Clear enough to be able to be understood easily. And at higher levels also a good enough pronunciation to be able to convey finer shades of meaning. Okay, so this is about the assessment of listening, and now I'd like to show you some of our City and Guilds listening exams, and just to remind you what a good listening task is like. If you remember, we mentioned that when you assess, you should try to limit the amount of reading and the amount of writing that they have to do. So at lower levels, this is an A1 paper. In some tasks, they don't even have to read at all. They just have to listen and circle the correct picture based on what they have heard. Of course, there are some tasks where they have to do some reading, but again, you can clearly see that the amount of reading and writing is limited to the minimum. And if you remember, we also mentioned that we should try and test their social linguistic competence, how well they know the social rules of language, and that A1 level listening part 2 is always such a task where they listen to a short they listen to one sentence, and at higher levels they will listen to a short conversation, and they have to circle the correct reply, the best reply that would be the best in that social context. So this is a very good tool that you can use to teach social language to your students. You can find all these practice papers on our cityandguildenglish.com website. We have 6 altogether per level. We have 6 levels, so altogether 6 times 6, we have 36 practice papers that you can use with your students. And I think listening part 2 and all the relevant parts in every level, we have something like this at every level, is very good to teach the social language and the social rules of language and the correct reactions in speech, and this way you could help your students teaching as well. Listening part 3 is about listening for slightly greater detail. They have to listen to a conversation and answer a question, or at higher levels answer 2 questions. The questions are always related to the topic, like here, what they are talking about, or the context where they are. In this task, they will also find questions related to the relationship between the speakers and the attitude of one of the speakers. I don't know, were they annoyed, frightened, bored, excited. And finally, again, this is the last listening task, and we are still doing A1 here. And just to remind you, minimal amount of reading and minimal amount of writing required, only a tick and only a few words to read. And this is important so that we can have a valid result in terms of their listening skills, and that result is not influenced by occasional problems with writing and reading skills. After all, writing and reading skills are assessed in different parts of this paper, so it is a good idea to try and limit the amount of these that they have to do. And if we move on to higher levels, I think this is a B2, if I'm not mistaken, and we have the same social linguistic task where they listen to a conversation and they have to choose the best reply to complete the conversation. We also have a slightly different task from the lower levels. We have a notepad where they have to answer with open questions, but sort of in line with what I said previously, that we are trying to limit the amount of writing that they have to do. We limit the word count to a maximum of 5 words. We don't want full sentences. We just want them to write the minimal amount required for us to be able to test whether they understood the text. So minimal amount of reading required, as you can see, just notes, and minimal amount of writing required. And finally, at higher levels, we have a longer conversation, and they have to answer multiple choice questions. So as you can see, we employ a lot of multiple choice questions. And I know sometimes people say that multiple choice questions are easy, but they're not easy. Of course, they can guess if they want, and they have a 25% chance. But the reason why multiple choice questions are good is because the amount of writing we need is minimal. All they have to do is circle the letter of the correct answer. And we can't really expect students to write and read a lot and at the same time listen. So I am not a big fan of open question tasks in listening tasks, and I know that lots of course books are full of such tasks. I don't think it's a good idea to ask students to answer open questions with full sentences. It just puts too much strain on their listening skills. Right. Now I have finished, but if you have any questions, please ask now, and I'll address all of these. Okay, and while you're typing up your questions, if you have any, I'll tell you that the recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint presentation is going to be available on our website soon, in a few weeks. We just need to, of course, cut and edit the video and then make sure that it works correctly, and then we will upload it, and you will find it in the exact same place as where you can already find the How to Teach Speaking and the How to Teach Writing webinar. Okay, and if you have no questions, then I will thank you for your participation in this training, and I hope it will help you greatly. If you have any questions, just feel free to send us an email. We are here to help, and you have a lovely day or evening, wherever you are. Okay, thank you. Bye.